Well, aloha everyone, and welcome back to Chaminade University's Human Nutrition course. Today we are going to start Unit 11, where we are going to discuss nutrition and fitness. First, we'll discuss the 5 basic components of fitness and talk about the features of a successful fitness program. And we'll talk about the role of our different biomolecules, such as carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, in the exercise regime. Namely, we'll talk about the timing of the different types of foods you should be consuming before, during, and after exercise. And then we'll go on to describe the importance of vitamins and minerals in physical fitness. Then we'll discuss the relationship between fluid intake and fitness. And last but not least, we'll talk about some common dietary supplements that are used in exercise and some of their known side effects. So let's hop right in. So physical fitness is defined as good health or physical condition as a result of exercise and proper nutrition, whereas physical activity is body movement that expends energy or kilocalories. And exercise is any physical activity that is structured or planned. Now, there are 5 components of physical fitness that include cardiorespiratory endurance, muscular strength, muscular endurance, flexibility, and body composition. Cardiorespiratory endurance is the ability to sustain cardiorespiratory exercise for an extended length of time. Muscular strength is the ability to produce muscular force for a brief period of time. Muscular endurance is the ability to exert force over a long period of time without fatigue. Flexibility would refer to the range of motion around a joint, which can be improved by stretching. And body composition is the proportionality of the different types of tissues in the body, basically muscle, fat, water, and other tissue types. So this here talks about the benefits of physical fitness. So first of all, physical fitness reduces your risk of cardiovascular disease because physical activity lowers your blood pressure. Additionally, physical exercise is associated with HDL, or your good or healthy cholesterol levels. It also improves your body composition because moderate cardiorespiratory fitness means you have less total fat and abdominal fat compared to people with lower cardiorespiratory fitness. And it reduces your risk of type 2 diabetes because exercise is going to help control your glucose levels in your blood by increasing your sensitivity to insulin. We also can have a reduced risk of different types of cancer because we know that physical activity is associated with a reduction of breast, colon, endometrial, and lung cancers, most likely as a result of reduction of body weight overall, and also different hormonal and metabolic mechanisms. We know that increased physical fitness is associated with improved bone health and bone density, as bone density increases with weight-bearing exercise, and it's associated with an improved immune system. Regular exercise enhances your immune system, means that you're going to end up with less sicknesses such as colds and other infectious diseases. It increases your well-being, your mental well-being, and helps protect against or ward off depression and anxiety disorders, and reduces symptoms in people who are already diagnosed with depression and anxiety. Additionally, it helps delay the onset of dementia and enhances mental well-being overall. Last but not least, it also improves sleep. That's especially true for older adults. So, what is a successful physical fitness program? A successful physical fitness program incorporates activities based on the 5 major components of fitness and is tailored to meet the needs of the individual. It's something that they can do on a consistent basis, and that means that they're going to have to target activities that are enjoyable to the clients. Cardiorespiratory exercise is going to improve endurance and body composition. And basically, this is a type of exercise that's continuous and uses large muscle groups. Typically, this is aerobic exercise. And they measure it based on your VO2 max, which is the maximum amount of oxygen your muscles are able to consume during your exercise regime. And cardiorespiratory conditioning means that you're doing these cardiorespiratory exercises over and over in order to help maintain your body weight, improve your body composition, reduce stress, and also reduce risk of heart disease. Now, there's a couple of different types of training that you might go under. You might undergo strength training to improve your muscle strength. You might go after something like muscle endurance. And all of this would be something that you would interact with in order to enhance your body composition. So if you wanted to increase your muscle strength, you would do a low number of repetitions using very heavy weights. But to increase your muscle endurance, you would do a high number of repetitions with much lighter muscle weights. Additionally, it's really important that you rest between exercise sets and in between workouts so that you avoid muscle injury and overworking some muscles. It's also important that you stretch as part of your muscle routine, your exercise routine. This helps reduce your muscle soreness and, again, helps reduce your risk of injury. Overall, it's also going to improve your balance, posture, and circulation. So we use the FIT principle, FIT with double T's, which is going to help to design a fitness program, and that stands for frequency, intensity, time, and type. So obviously frequency, how often the activity is performed. Intensity would be the level of difficulty that the activity is going to be rated, either low, moderate, or vigorous, and how long the activity is performed and the type of activity performed. So the amounts of which are going to be dependent on what the client is trying to achieve. So here's the FITT overall: frequency, intensity, time, and type. So we're going to aim for cardiorespiratory fitness, muscular fitness, and flexibility. And a client may want to aim for a blend of all three of these or lean more heavily on one or the other. So for example, if they really wanted flexibility, you might send them towards yoga, right? Cardiorespiratory fitness, you might send them on something like long running escapades. So depending on what the client's going for, you could end up with a mix of all three of these. But this basically just tells you what type of muscle, what type of exercise you're going for, and how long you should be aiming, what kind of intensity you're aiming for, and the frequency you'd be aiming to do it. Now, this is a physical activity pyramid. So every day you should be doing something that is low to moderate intensity. Things like walking or stair climbing or light bicycling, playing with pets every single day. So any small things that you can do to make changes include walking rather than driving for short trips, or taking the steps instead of the elevator, any opportunity that you get, or taking exercise with the family, such as riding bikes with the children or walking the dog, trying to incorporate things into your daily life that are small changes that you can make that incorporate low to moderate intensity exercise. You'd also try to 3 to 5 days a week hit some cardiorespiratory exercises that might be moderate to high intensity, including things like brisk walking, basketball, soccer, jogging, racquetball, etc. 2 to 3 days a week, you should be working on your flexibility and your muscle fitness, such as yoga or Pilates, stretching, weightlifting, etc. And you should try to minimize the sedentary activities, such as watching TV or using your computer. I know that's very difficult in this whole Zoom era, but if you can try to treat this as a treat or a reward for yourself after you've completed your physical activities, then you can sit and catch up on your favorite TV programs. So in order to improve fitness over time, you can use something called the progressive overload principle. This allows you to challenge the body by performing different workout regimes throughout the week that are going to adjust in frequency, intensity, time, and type. So you're never going to get bored, and it's going to allow you to prevent a fitness plateau because the body can adapt to an exercise regimen and become kind of used to it or tailored to it, such that that type of exercise routine no longer is going to be as effective as switching that exercise routine up often. So how do we utilize the biomolecules such as carbohydrates, fats, and proteins during exercise? So we have anaerobic energy production, which is going to be production of energy that does not require oxygen. So it's a quick way to get ATP, which is our cellular energy molecule, for really intense activities. So it works out well for things that require strength, agility, or speed, or sudden bursts of energy. And we're going to be doing this anaerobic energy production for the first few seconds of exercise. And that works because we're using something called creatine phosphate, which is located in muscle cells, to be able to very quickly recycle the ATP, which then gets turned into ADP, but then it can pick up another free phosphate from creatine phosphate, which will release that phosphate to bring that diphosphate back up to triphase phosphate. So for the first 2 to 3 seconds, we're using the ATP in muscle. Then for the next 7 to 10 seconds, ATP from creatine phosphate is going to reload the DP that's created here to make more ATP. And then after that, we enter into glycolysis or aerobic respiration. And that's where we're going to get the rest of our ATP from. So this is going to be the way in which creatine phosphate can help reload your ADP. So for the first couple of seconds, adenosine triphosphate is going to release the phosphate, which is going to create ADP and free energy. And that free energy is going to be used to drive your muscular contractions, etc. And then very quickly, creatine phosphate will cleave off its free phosphates. And that free phosphate will be used to recycle this ADP back into ATP, or the triphosphate form, very quickly so that it can then be used for sustained muscular contractions. However, eventually you will deplete these creatine phosphate reserves, and then you're going to have to get your energy from glycolysis, which is again going to be an aerobic respiratory pathway. So aerobic energy production occurs during exercise, and exercise is going to end up hitting kind of a wall when ATP and creatine phosphate stores are depleted. During this time frame, the body is going to have to use ATP generated by aerobic metabolism, and while aerobic metabolism creates more ATP, it takes just a little bit longer to create it, so there's a little bit of a lag, and we can get ATP from a multitude of different resources, including carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, can all be turned into ATP that we can use if we need it for muscular contractions, etc. And the type and amount used of this is going to depend on the intensity and duration of the exercise, the nutritional status of the client, as well as the level of physical fitness of the individual. Now, the carbohydrate is going to be the primary energy source during exercise that is considered high intensity. It's going to be the first source for working muscles, and it's going to come directly from the blood in the form of blood glucose. Additionally, it's going to come from the form of glycogen, which is stored in your muscles in your liver, which can be broken down into free glucose, and the dietary carbohydrates that you take in, which can again be broken down into free sugars. Approximately 2,600 kcals of glycogen are stored in the body, and we can again use that glycogen to be able to be converted almost immediately into glucose, which then we can use for our working muscles. However, after we exercise, we're going to deplete those glycogen stores, typically within the first 20 minutes of high intensity exercise, and after 90 minutes of low intensity exercise. So eventually we get to the point where we hit a wall in terms of our glycogen store as well. So then what do we do? Well, if the muscle glycogen, which is our preferred source, it runs out, then we use liver glycogen. And liver glycogen is going to also contribute, but eventually also run out. And then we'll start using blood glucose, so the glucose from the blood directly, which is where the liver glycogen is going to get broken down to as well. We also have something called lactate that is produced during low intensity exercise, and that's going to be converted to glucose in the liver. Again, we're going to be using this glucose and glycogen, and the amount of glucose and or glycogen that we're using is affected by the intensity of the exercise, the duration of the exercise, and again, the conditioning of the client. So carbohydrate requirements are going to depend on the duration of the exercise. People who exercise regularly should make sure that carbohydrates are kept in their daily diet in order to keep their muscle glycogen stores filled. Otherwise, your muscles can start to deteriorate because you can start taking your energy directly from your muscle glycogen levels, which is obviously not going to be what you want to do if you're going to be trying to build muscle. This also, carbohydrate use is going to help optimize your performance and limit your fatigue onset. And in fact, athletes actually use a strategy called carbohydrate loading or carb loading in order to help build glycogen stores before they go on things like marathons, etc. They might carb load the night before with a ton of pasta or a bunch of rice. So, in order to focus on your diet, so let's talk about simple carbohydrates. You want to take simple carbohydrates before exercise, so immediately before and during your exercise. But your complex carbohydrates, you want to take a few hours before exercise. So this would be what we consider, again, carb loading. And that's because the simple carbohydrates are going to be the first things that are going to go right into your blood sugar, something like from your Gatorade or your fruit juice, right? That goes immediately into your bloodstream. But the complex carbohydrates are going to take a little bit longer to break down, and so then they're going to be able to be broken down continuously during longer term exercise. Now, during low to moderate intensity exercise, we're going to be burning fat as our primary energy source. And the energy from fat is going to come from our muscle tissue, as well as free fatty acids that are found from adipose stores that are going to be delivered into the blood supply. And the factors that are going to affect the amount of fat that's used during exercise is going to be the intensity. So low intensity exercise is going to use fatty acids from stored adipose tissue, whereas moderate intensity exercise is going to use free fatty acids from muscle triglycerides and less from the adipose tissue. So if you're trying to burn fat, you're going for that low intensity, longer term exercise workouts. Now again, the duration is going to affect your fat burning. So 20 plus minutes of low to moderate intensity exercise is going to burn the greatest amount of fats, and also the conditioning of the individuals. Individuals who are highly trained are going to start burning more fatty acids for energy than individuals who are not training as regularly. The amount of fat that's needed for exercise is approximately 25 to 35% of the kcals from fat, and athletes should make sure that they don't consume more than 20% of their total kcals from fat. So if you're going to make sure that you are going to be performing in athletic capacity, you're going to try to make sure that you're getting 20% or less of your kcals from fat. All right, so how does this work in the body? So here's A is going to be the breakdown of triglycerides in fatty tissue, and that's depicted here. Here's your adipose tissue by these big yellow globs. That breaks down into free fatty acids which circulate through the bloodstream. And the glycerol, so free fatty acids and glycerol, where the triglycerides break down into, those are the components of triglycerides. They're also going to be hydrolyzed from intramuscular fat stores. So that's depicted here in B, free fatty acids that come out of your intramuscular fat stores. And both of these are going to end up entering into the bloodstream. Now, free fatty acids and glycerol are going to be taken up by the muscle cell for energy, both from the bloodstream and also directly from the muscle cell. And we also are going to have glycerol in the liver, which produces glucose through a process called gluconeogenesis, or the creation of new glucose molecules. Glucose is then going to diffuse into the bloodstream and then end up being picked up and then enter into the muscle tissue. We also have free fatty acids that are going to be found in that muscle tissue, and that's going to it's going to be found both in the muscle tissue and also from the bloodstream itself, and they're going to produce ATP. Additionally, glycerol is going to be converted into pyruvate, which is an anaerobic conversion, but then it's going to be converted through aerobic metabolism into ATP, which is the process of cellular respiration. And that's how we're going to get the energy for that muscle to be able to contract. But protein is going to be really important for repairing muscle and building muscle. So exercise is going to increase a biomolecule called cortisol, and cortisol is going to stimulate the turnover of proteins in your body. Now, a small amount of proteins are actually going to be used as energy sources during your physical activity, and if we don't have enough kilocalorie intake from carbohydrate stores, then the body is going to rely on protein next. And this is why when we said previously what we should be doing with carbohydrates, you should intake carbohydrates before you exercise, such that we don't end up having our proteins from our body be broken down during exercise. So if protein breakdown actually exceeds protein synthesis because our diet is wrong, muscle atrophy can occur even if we're exercising. So building muscle is both a combination of exercise and diet. So recreational exercisers need to meet their protein needs pretty easily with 0.8 grams per kilogram by eating a balanced diet. Endurance athletes, however, and those doing more intense exercise like resistance training and strength training, they might need more protein. And again, this need can be met by a balanced diet. Endurance athletes need about 1.2 to 1.4 grams per kilogram of body weight daily. This is why athletes will often take protein supplements or protein shakes, etc. However, that's not everything, right? And just because you're adding protein, that's not going to be to your diet. That's not going to be everything. You also are going to have to add the exercise in as well. Resistance and strength athletes are going to need more than that, as they're going to need 1.6 to 1.7 grams per kilogram body weight daily. These are going to both be in the range that are going to be out of what you're normally going to be getting for your diet. So probably these are going to be supplements, or they're going to be intentionally eating a lot of meats and type protein style things like peanut butter, etc. All right, so this is going to be talking about when we're going to be using our original ATP versus our ATP creatine phosphates versus burning our carbohydrates versus then we're going to, after burning our carbohydrates, we start burning our fat. So this is basically the order in which we're going to start using these biomolecules. The first thing that we're going to do on those first 3 seconds is going to be fueled by ATP. And then remember, creatine phosphate is going to refill that ATP. So we have a second launch of that ATP. And all of that's happening under anaerobic conditions. But we're also going to be upregulating our aerobic pathway, and we're going to be breaking down carbohydrates as our next stage. So first ATP/ATP creatine phosphate, and then we're going to start burning carbohydrates. That's going to happen in the next 10 seconds or so. And then after that, we're burning mainly carbohydrates with very little bit of our ATP creatine phosphate, and that's really just going to be whatever our reserves of creatine phosphate are left. Again, they're only going to last for about 10 seconds. After that, so once we get into the past the 5 minutes and into like the half-hour mark, we're going to be burning carbohydrates, yes, but more fat, so 40% fat or so. And then as we get into sustained exercise, such as the marathon and the multiple hours of running, now we're burning mainly carbohydrates, 20% fat, and then a good bit of other. So if you're aiming to be burning fat, you might not want to be doing something like a marathon. You might want to be doing something like a 10K, where we're going to be burning mainly fat, or much more fat than we would be otherwise. But you also might want to think about something like a longer-term endurance exercise, like a day hike, which takes longer than a marathon, but isn't going to be running the entire time, and that's going to be burning a good bit more fat than carbohydrates. All right, so the timing of meals is important, right? We just talked about the different parts or the different biomolecules that are consumed at different time frames by your body. So you want to make sure that you are allowing your body enough time to digest that food before exercise. So for smaller meals, that's 2 to 3 hours. For large meals, that's 3 to 4 hours. And for something like a liquid supplement or a small snack, that's at least 30 minutes to 1 hour. And that's because we want to make sure that we're maintaining our blood glucose levels throughout our exercise properly. So we want to make sure that we're consuming carbohydrates not only beforehand, but also during physical activity every 15 to 20 minutes or so. We want to make sure we're bringing in about 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour. And then after we exercise, we want to make sure that we're eating proteins and some appropriate foods to make sure that our muscles are recovering and repairing properly. So prior to exercise, we want to make sure that we're intaking carbohydrates, approximately 1 to 4.5 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram of our client's body weight. Consuming that carbohydrate at least 30 minutes before exercise, focusing on simple carbohydrates. Now, while I say simple carbohydrates, and I do mean simple sugars, we want to avoid carbonated drinks and also high fiber foods. Both of these are going to cause some intestinal distress, which might not be the best time while we are exercising heavily or even moderately. You want to make sure you consume moderate amounts of protein beforehand with the carbohydrates to promote the synthesis of glycogen in the muscles and also protein synthesis overall. And for several hours before exercise, you want to avoid high fat foods. Why? Because the objective is to burn that fat off, right? And you're not going to get into the point of where you're burning the fat for much longer if you've consumed more fat ahead of time. So you want to make sure that you're avoiding that high fat foods in the beginning so that when you actually are burning the fat off, you're burning fat from your fat stores. Some of the recommended foods include things like sports drinks and bars and gels. These can be really good ways to get nutrient-dense calories in. You want to try to make sure that you can avoid things like fructose. Again, that's because it can cause some people GI distress. So even though it's going to be a simple sugar, it may cause issues with the intestinal distress during exercise. And you want to make sure that you consume carbohydrates and proteins to help improve a net protein balance for athletes that are going to be undergoing endurance. This way we're going to avoid muscle atrophy. So you want to make sure that you're adding protein to your diet to be able to make sure that you're not going to start eating away at your body's own protein reserves. You want to make sure that you're consuming carbohydrates consistently to replenish your muscles and your liver glycogen. You want to do this effectively at least half an hour to 45 minutes before exercise, and consume large amounts of protein and carbohydrates in order to increase the protein synthesis in your muscles. A really good way to do this is with low-fat chocolate milk. It's a low-cost dietary option which provides whey protein and carbohydrates which assist in muscle recovery and repair, as well as getting your calcium in. Now, a high carbohydrate, moderate protein, low fat meal should be consumed within 2 hours of eating so that you can make sure that you restore the protein and all of the calories that you've burned off such that you're not going to be depleting your own protein stores. And again, we want to make sure it's a low fat meal because the objective was to burn that fat off, so we don't want to put that fat right back on, now do we? All right. We also want to talk about vitamins and minerals. There are several vitamins and minerals that are important for physical fitness. Certain things like antioxidants help protect the cells from cellular stress, which can be caused by exercise. And things like free radicals can be created by prolonged exercise. Vitamins E and vitamin C are really good protecting agents to be able to protect cells from the damage of these free radicals. Now, we know that people take supplements, but the supplementation above whatever the recommended daily allowance is not going to improve athletic performance or decrease oxidative stress. So the point is that you're going to be able to maximize the amount of assistance you're going to get for the protection from free radicals, and after you take anything past that amount, you're not actually going to be able to decrease oxidative stress any further. Now, some individuals that are highly active can end up deficient in iron, and iron is really important for energy metabolism, and also it's in our hemoglobin, which is responsible for oxygen transport. So if you end up with low levels of iron, that can be due to multiple things, including heavy menstruation in women, for example, or something called hemolytic anemia. So intravascular hemolysis can lead to hemolytic anemia, but that's not related to necessarily the iron status. That just means that we're going to have low amounts of, so we're going to have lysed blood cells. We also have sports anemia, which is also not necessarily related to your iron status, but is really going to be a dilution of the red blood cells, which happens because we have an increased blood volume during exercise. So the red blood cells kind of dilute out, as opposed to lysine open, which would be what intravascular hemolysis does. When the hemolytic anemia is basically when you have a low blood cells, you have low blood cells due to the fact that they're lysine open. Now, if individuals have low iron, that might be something that you want to take supplements for. So you can take iron supplements, which sometimes can cause constipation. So sometimes these iron supplements can cause issues with bowel distress. So you want to make sure that that's something that's weighed against what that client is dealing with in terms of their intestinal design. We want to make sure that you're taking in calcium. Calcium is really important for bone density. So the more calcium that you can take in to help reduce the risk of bone injury, the better. It's going to be lost in sweat. So losses can be extremely high sometimes in athletes, and this is going to be what's called an insensible loss. So you might not actually notice that you're losing it because sweat is one of those things that you're not really paying attention to. And supplementation of calcium is not necessarily recommended. However, if you know that your intake is inadequate to meet your daily allowance, then you do want to make sure that you are getting your supplements. In general, however, vitamin and mineral supplementation is not necessary because you're typically going to be able to get what you need from an appropriate diet. However, you do want to obviously make sure that you're paying attention to your nutrition so you are meeting your dietary needs. Now, there is something called the female athlete triad, which is a syndrome that occurs mainly with female athletes. And there are 3 interrelated conditions that occur in some physically active females. Essentially what happens is they can end up with disordered eating. It can be unintentional or it can be intentional, where they're just not getting enough calories in, so they have low energy availability. And also, if they are combining low energy availability with high energy output like exercise, then we can end up with what's called amenorrhea. And amenorrhea is when we have no menstrual cycle for 3 consecutive months. This can lead to subfertility, etc., because basically what's happening is there just simply isn't enough energy in the body to be able to support pregnancy, and so the body stops going through the menstrual cycle. Additionally, this is associated with a loss of bone density or premature osteoporosis, which can often result in stress fractures. So these individuals want to make sure that they are meeting their dietary needs by increasing their caloric intake to meet their exercise regime, as well as meeting their calcium needs such that they can restore their bone density to normal. Now, fluid intake is also really important in exercise and physical fitness. Adequate fluid intake is going to help optimize an athlete's performance, help prevent dehydration, and also help stave off electrolyte imbalances. And exercise is going to help induce water loss and electrolyte loss. So you want to help make sure that you're staving that off by taking in not just fluid, but also electrolytes, because an electrolyte imbalance can lead to cramps, a loss of blood pressure, so a drop in blood pressure, nauseation, so becoming sick, or leading to the feeling of vomiting. And it can also lead to swelling or edema in your hands and your feet. Now, electrolytes are pretty easily replaced by diet or even sports drinks, but if you're not paying attention and you over-exercise without restoring your electrolytes, you're just drinking a ton of water, then you can end up with these symptoms here of the electrolyte imbalance. Now, the external environment drastically affects your physical fitness and fluid intake in certain environments, like I mentioned. So greater fluid losses are going to occur in your hot, humid weather than they do in cooler weather. In extreme humidity, the body has a hard time cooling down because the water from the sweat never evaporates off because it's met with liquid in the environment. So that can lead to hyperthermia. Even though you are sweating, the sweat is never actually evaporating. And this can lead to an increased risk for heat stroke or heat exhaustion. The flip side is that in cold weather, you can increase your risk of hypothermia. So exercising in cold weather, especially exercise that breaks the sweats, can then lead to hypothermic conditions. So you have to be really careful if you're exercising in, say, Antarctica. This table illustrates the warning signs of heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Note that they look very similar, and one can lead to another. So heat exhaustion is obviously going to be the first stage, and heat stroke is going to be the second stage. Heat exhaustion can be preceded by profuse sweating and fatigue, extreme thirst, of course, because you're losing a lot of liquid. Muscle cramps, again, you don't have enough liquid in your muscles, so you can end up with salt imbalance. Headaches, again, also from loss of water. A lot of these are going to be similar to dehydration. Dizziness, lightheadedness, weakness, cool, clammy, moist skin, nausea, and vomiting. Now, heat stroke is going to get to the point where we've stopped sweating. Our skin is now red, hot, and dry. There's no more sweat coming out. The pulse is rapid but strong. Our breathing is shallow and also rapid. The headache has progressed from just a slight headache to a throbbing headache. We're still going to be experiencing dizziness and nausea. And it's at this point we're going to be experiencing perhaps extreme confusion, delirium, maybe not knowing what day it is or where we are or what has happened, and sometimes can lead to loss of consciousness. Typically, this is going to be extremely high body temperatures. Temperatures above 103 are going to lead to heat stroke. All right, so this is why you want to make sure that you're bringing in adequate fluid. Fluids are needed before, during, and after exercise. And the way in which you can determine how much fluid you should be taking in during exercise, you want to weigh yourself before and after exercise. You should be drinking water before and during exercise. And if you're going to have lost any weight before and after exercise, you want to make sure that you're consuming between 20 and 24 ounces of fluid for every pound of body weight lost during exercise to help restore the water back to the muscle and to your tissues. So this table is talking about hydration recommendations. So how much fluid should you drink before and when? So before exercise, approximately 4 hours, you should drink about 2 to 2.5 cups of water. 10 to 15 minutes before exercise, you should drink another 1 to 1.5 cups of water. And every 15 to 20 minute intervals, you should be drinking about 1 cup of water if you're exercising less than 60 minutes. After 60 minutes, you should be drinking a cup of sports beverage. So not just water, but water with sugars and electrolytes present. And then after you exercise, for every pound of body weight lost, you should be drinking 20 to 24 fluid ounces of water. So another 2.5 to 3 cups. That's all to make sure that you're meeting your hydration recommendations during physical exercise. Now, not all liquids are created equal. Some beverages are better than others. Obviously, sports drinks and other electrolyte-containing beverages such as Pedialyte are going to be optimum. They're going to contain carbohydrates as well as sodium and potassium. So these are the most beneficial for exercise if you're going to have exercise lasting longer than 60 minutes. Now, if your exercise is under 60 minutes, water will be adequate because the assumption is that you're going to be eating on the other side of exercise as well. Now, certain beverages are simply suboptimal for hydration. Things like juice and juice drinks, again, we want to avoid fructose, which is juice or fruit sugars. Carbonated drinks, this may cause intestinal distress. Alcohol and caffeine, both of which are diuretics, which can cause fluid imbalance during physical exercise. Additionally, with alcohol is it's a non-nutritive source of calories, but it's a calorie source, and so your body can actually end up burning that off instead of burning off the carbohydrates and the fats, which are what you intend for the body to be burning off. Now, again, as I mentioned, fluid balance is really important. So consuming too little or too much fluid can be harmful to your client. So too little fluid means that we can end up with acute or chronic dehydration. And just being thirsty is not necessarily a reliable indicator of fluid needs. By the time you're thirsty, you have already lost a good bit of your body's liquids. So to prevent acute dehydration, you want to follow a rehydration schedule where you are going to be drinking before, during, and after exercise. You want to be drinking, again, water and something that has electrolytes in it, like a sports drink or Pedialyte. And chronic dehydration happens when we have inadequate fluid consumption over a long period of time. And this is something that can be indicated in your urine by being dark and cloudy, and also by the fact that you're not going to the bathroom very often. On the flip side, you can have too much water, and excess water consumption, especially if you're not drinking electrolytes with it, so pure water, can dilute your blood out, and it can also cause hyponatremia or low amounts of sodium. And hyponatremia can have pretty severe symptoms, including rapid weight gain, nausea, vomiting, swollen hands and feet, headache, dizziness, and confusion. So your sodium balance and your water balance is very important to not only your physical exercise, but also in your muscle performance, but also your mental performance and mental clarity. So this is showing the effects of dehydration on your exercise and performance. So fully hydrated, you're going to be good to go. As you end up into the 2 to 4%, you're going to start feeling thirsty. This is when you're also going to be experiencing reduced muscle endurance. A little bit further on, once you've reached about the 5% water loss, you're going to be reducing your muscle strength. And as you enter into the 6 to 8% muscle water loss as a percent of your body weight, now you're entering into heat cramps and heat exhaustion. So by the time you're thirsty, you've already entered into the I've lost more water than I ought to have. So you really should try to stay in the hydrated range, which is going to be before you're even feeling thirsty. All right, so let's talk about dietary supplements. Substances that are used to improve athletic performance, such as dietary substances, are called ergogenic aids. Oftentimes, these include things like creatine. Remember, we talked about creatine phosphate being used as storage for ATP, so that can help with endurance for those first couple of seconds. Also, caffeine, which can help us give a little bit of a boost of energy. Bicarbonate, which helps buffer our blood. Amino acids, which are going to help build up our cells, and also sports shakes and drinks, which are probably going to be high in protein, etc., and electrolytes. So, creatine is something that is going to be helpful in athletic performance. If you're looking for high intensity, short duration activities such as weight training, it helps to increase your muscle strength and your muscle mass. However, it does have the side effect of water retention, and there are some reports of liver and kidney problems, so you don't want to take it for very long or extreme periods of time. Caffeine is going to help stimulate the CNS, which helps decrease your perception of effort. So, what was something that might have been perceived as difficult is now going to be perceived as a little bit easier. And it helps increase your metabolism. So, it's going to help break down your fatty acids and also help increase the use of your spare glycogen stores. Additionally, it helps increase your athletic performance during endurance events. But there's not really much of an effect on short duration events. Now, caffeine is a banned substance when it's found in the urine in high concentration, so in higher than 15 micrograms per milliliter. And I don't know exactly what this is, but I do know that this is way more than just a couple cups of coffee. Additionally, people take bicarbonate. Bicarbonate is going to help keep your pH stable. It helps to counter a pH drop which can occur when you produce lactate during high intensity exercise. Now, some of the side effects of bicarbonate can include gastric reflux, nausea, and bloating, because it's going to go directly into the intestinal tract, which is going to do what it normally does to help restore pH, but that means that we're going to have additional buffer inside our body, and that can cause things like diarrhea, flatulence, and intestinal distress. Some people take amino acids as supplements. Supplementation doesn't necessarily enhance performance, but it can enhance recovery and repair after your exercise. Now, there's a ton of sports bars and sports shakes that are out there that are not necessarily defined as dietary supplements by the FDA, and they typically are going to be a combination of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Now, they are definitely convenient, but are often more expensive than just adding these to your own diet. And they are definitely not meant to be a replacement for your nutritious foods in the diet. And just adding protein and eating sports bars and shakes is not going to enhance your sports performance. The caveat there, obviously, is that it's going to have to be supplemented with exercise. All right, so that brings us to the end of our lecture. I really appreciate you listening to me today. Aloha and happy studying. Goodbye, everyone.